All right, well, I want to start today by asking Will a question here. Will and I actually first met yesterday, but we have one thing in common. We both share a board member, Trip Hawkins, who had founded Electronic Arts and Digital Chocolate, among other companies.
He's actually not on our board.
Oh, he's not on your board, okay.
He's a buddy.
So a buddy, mutual relationship. So I wanted to, anyway, though, the first question I had for Will, tell me about your history in mobile game monetization and overall just game monetization. What have you seen?
Well, actually, we're relatively new to mobile, as some of you know, but to give you kind of a history of Kixeye. We started primarily on the Facebook platform doing free-to-play browser gaming, doing the first MMORTS and Backyard Monsters, then Battle Pirates and War Commander, which still continue to operate and do very well. I think a lot of industries, and mobile is no different, a lot of lessons learned came from the early times of Facebook gaming and transitioned to mobile and kind of defined a lot of the free-to-play monetization methodologies. So, you still see a lot of exchanging money for time, doing a lot of speed-ups, in-game currency. You'll see some various gambling mechanics, loot drops, things like that. So it's all been done before. I don't think we've really seen any monetization that was invented on the mobile platform. It was all coming from free-to-play PC gaming in Asia and in Europe back in the day, then browser gaming. So our new mobile games, most of which are in test market right now, use a lot of those things plus a few other new kinds of mechanics that we're coming up with. But so far we've stayed away from any kind of ad-supported and all mostly just focused on virtual currency.
All right, so you mentioned you're with Kixeye's games, you're really focused on real games, kind of role-playing games that have a very high revenue per player. And then kind of in the middle, you have mid-core games and kind of casual games that are a lot of them are very popular in the West. So you look at that, I know one of the things we talked about yesterday a little bit was about the strength of the mobile ecosystem, and tell me more about what that, how that looks in mobile, how that's shaping your approach to, going forward with mobile.
Well, it's the rising tide. I mean, just like, a few years ago where you had the rising tide of Facebook, you had very healthy viral channels, relatively straightforward methods of player acquisition. It was a healthy platform. Where today we've seen that kind of replaced by, Apple's iOS App Store and obviously Google Play for Android. You've seen a lot of that kind of fill that void. So, the way that we're set up and the way that I would assume that most developers set up are not to rely on any one platform. And I think that's a very important lesson to learn for anyone who kind of went through kind of the rise and kind of leveling off of the Facebook platform and other platforms, because you just can't put all your eggs in one basket. So I don't think there's a lot that's really that different with mobile. Well, there's a certain that can aid to one's advantage. For one, you've got kind of that persistent download that you've got saved on a mobile device, which you didn't have for basically persistentless browser platforms. You've actually got something that's downloaded. Same with Steam. Steam is very much a great delivery platform for games that's actually putting something on your PC, your device. So I think there's certainly a rising tide in mobile, and we see the continued expansion of that. So I think it's just a very healthy ecosystem. And as a developer, you simply just have to be able to turn on a dime and take advantage of whatever rising tide that you're seeing on any platform. So I guess we're doing a little bit of a different format here where we don't have kind of a moderator thing. So I'd like to ask you some questions, Rob, if that'd be okay.
Go for it.
Tell me about NativeX.
Well, NativeX, one of the things we're really focused on is designing advertising to fit into games, particularly mobile games, and that's really different than how most advertising has been done in games up until now. It's really been designing ads for horizontally the whole mobile ecosystem. I think, and really it's focused on trying to enhance the player experience in games, make advertising fit in. But it's interesting. I know in the terms of data science, I think there's, I think of what's going on in games and advertising, and there's a couple of main themes that I see. I think on the on the ad technology side, we've invested very heavily in data science, machine learning, and predictive modeling. We've looked at thousands of different variables that can impact performance, ranging from ad formats, the advertising creative itself, and when to show an advertisement based on emotional placements within a game. And when we look at that, we look at these thousands of variables and basically look at the predictive value of each and use that with basically artificial intelligence to find the 18 to 22 variables that have the most predictive value. And that basically changes the experience on an individual user's basis for that specific session. And I think the gaming market, as we're seeing it mature, I'd love to hear kind of what you're seeing from a data science perspective with your games. And so maybe I can redirect it back to you, Will. Tell us more about how you guys use data science at KIXEYE.
There were certainly a lot of companies that were basing their kind of fundamental principles of operation around purely analytics. Everything from choosing what kind of content, what kind of theme to select, what kind of game mechanics. That started out with marketing analytics, so looking at the market, surveying, figuring out what people would like in the first place, all the way down to basically every kind of step of the way people were using analytics ad nauseum to design the entire experience. I think what separates us apart and a lot of other developers is, we're the players of the game. We're kind of looking at the market from a player lens and thinking what doesn't exist that we would like to play or what could be done better. So we primarily start with a basic intuitive problem solving or just get our creative juices flowing and think about what we actually want to do or play as a player. And then we augment that with data science, either predictive modeling or just basic A/B testing, multivariate testing to figure out exactly which of our decisions are good versus bad. I think we learned a lot of lessons from the early days. We tried to copy a lot of approaches of what some of the other larger developers were doing at the time. When we were only 15 people 5 years ago, we were probably doing way too much data-driven decision making, and I think that hurt us in some way until we kind of found the right balance. I'd say right now it's really 60% kind of intuitive decision making, 40% data-driven decision making. But when those are at odds, if we think something would be really fun and we don't necessarily have the data back up to justify the development, we're probably going to err on the side of let's do something that's just fun. Where I think there's a lot of companies out there that are maybe leaning too much on the side of data, but you got to have a balance. I mean, you can't just do everything based on intuition. I mean, maybe you've got the golden touch and you can figure it out and you don't need data to back it up. But we're certainly not there. So, balance is key.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you see what's going on. I think, really when you get to the more advanced kind of artificial intelligence and machine learning, it's very expensive to build those internal capabilities. And I think for the average game publisher, they're not going to be able to justify building out this kind of data, this kind of predictive modeling and machine learning into their business. I think as we're starting to see these more evergreen titles that are holding these top grossing positions and generating hundreds of millions of dollars a year, we're starting to see that level of artificial intelligence apply on the high end of the market, because obviously, if they saw similar results as we do versus more rule-based kind of business intelligent models versus the predictive models, we see right now we're seeing about a 260 to 270% increase. Mm-hmm. So, if they can see that on a game that's generating a few $100 million a year, that's going to drop a lot of revenue to their bottom line.
Well, I mean, let me flip that around. So, we've had to build our own solutions around analytics and data science because, frankly, I don't think there really exists any, commercially viable solution that fits any one developer's needs. You really have to tailor it to yourself. What did you guys do in the beginning? I assume you built.
We built it all from everything from scratch. We hired our Dr. James Shanahan, who had several years of related experience, and hired him a couple of years ago to build up a team. We have 14 data scientists, multiple PhDs.
But you guys built the tech from
scratch. We built all of it from scratch. Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I think it would have been, we're trying to do something very unique in terms of creating these native ad formats and combining it with emotional placements. And it's similar to what has been done with ad technology before, but it's different, because of the sort of art, that the art and the science of sort of getting it right in the in the eyes of a player. So I think that is interesting. There's certainly no shortage of middleware companies, I'm sure, that are calling you up all the time, right? So
I mean, I haven't found any that are any good, to be honest. But maybe we haven't used the right ones, but it's been a constant thorn in our side since day one. We've tried to use other solutions, but they just simply have not worked.
So how about another aspect on data science? I know one thing, you guys probably look at lifetime values of the users on the advertising side. Can you talk more about how you guys do that, or your internal processes for that?
I mean, honestly, I don't know enough. I mean, I did the first calculations back in the day, but now they just wake me up for the important meetings. So I can say that we definitely err on the side of being very conservative with the models. We make some very broad conservative assumptions to make sure that we can always afford advertising at profitability. And I think I do see a lot of younger startups that make the mistake that are a little bit too over-optimistic about the LTV of their players, and that's going to cost them dearly, and they're going to have some very inefficient spend and probably go out of business, and they're not going to have the cash flow to back up their spend. So, I mean, our average retention in some cases is well over 2 years for some of our games, but in our models, we typically assume 9 months just to make sure that we're on the side of conservative modeling to figure out where we can spend profitably. I'd say in some cases we've probably been too conservative and we haven't been as aggressive as we should have around marketing spend. But it's kind of a chicken egg problem here. I mean, you really have to have a lot of data to really figure out exactly what the LTV is, especially if you're a new developer and you just have one game and it's only a few months old. Like, it's impossible to figure out what your LTV is because the end of the story hasn't been written yet. I mean, especially you have kind of a game as a service, live free-to-play game that's constantly in development. You hope it's going to be around for years to come. You need a lot of data. So you got to be very conservative and just kind of swag exactly what you think you can afford to spend, but be very conservative and focus on creating a quality experience and make sure that that's going to monetize so you can back up your spend.
So I'm curious, on the role-playing game side, we're talking about monetization, kind of to change topics a little bit, and as it relates to player experience, Kabam, I think it was last September 2013, and then most recently in August, there's been some news about their Dragon of Atlantis game where some of their biggest spenders in that game have been protesting some of the updates. And I think it's a small group of users, but I'm sure it's something that you got to be mindful of as a role-playing game, that you're not, how do you find this balance in terms of generating revenue, from, maximizing your revenue on a small player base to drive your business forward?
That's a very good question. It's something that we're kind of actively trying to figure out how we create it. Well, I think one, I mean, this is a complicated answer. You could talk for days about this, but to kind of briefly summarize, I think that's the biggest problem that's facing a lot of the free-to-play games. There are too many games that focus on whale spend, a very small percentage driving 80% plus of the revenue. You've got to kind of transition from more of a pay-to-win atmosphere to a true free-to-play experience and figure out monetization where you can't just let spending go crazy. I mean, we're certainly guilty of it. We've had many people that have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on some of our games. But we're always trying to think of ways to make the game fair and balanced for someone who's spent, $5 a player versus, a few $1,000s a player. And the way you do that is by making sure that the game is balanced. Let's say if you spend $1,000, you should be elevated up in terms of, so you should be balanced in the game based on power level. So if you spend X into the game, that's going to give you a multiplier in your power level. So you can't just go and beat up on a bunch of people who haven't spent any or haven't played a lot. So if you spend a lot, you should be matched with people who have also spent a lot or people who have played a lot. So you have to kind of balance based on power and be able to pit kind of people, especially in a PvP mode, be able to pit people against, a fair fight, basically. So, I mean, we've been very fortunate as our games have gone on. We have a very high percentage of spenders, so it's not a problem that plagues us anymore. We've been able to figure out a lot of things to make sure the game is fair, and we have a lot of spenders, so it's not just a few people beating up on everybody. But I think sooner or later there's going to have to be a force. Well, developers will be figuring out, and there'll be less pay-to-win games, and those will be a lot more attractive to the masses. So we won't see as many pay-to-win games, assuming that that players favor things that are a little bit more fair and more advantageous for them to play. But yeah, I mean I think that kind of ties in with what's going to be the freemium of free to play. What ties into the future of freemium and free to play? It's things that aren't so pay to win. So it's not a sustainable ecosystem.
Yeah.
What are you guys seeing?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think I think definitely. I think to have a healthy game, the less pressure we can put on that, you either get more payers and more people sharing in the revenue that's needed to power these businesses, and I think advertising has a role in that, particularly in the games that are more casual, where we've seen heavy adoption in those type of games. But I think also as a way to provide, if we can earn a few dollars from the other 90% of the sort of the non-payers, that can go a long way of sort of sharing the burden with the payers that are sort of covering the cost for these games. But I think increasingly, I know a lot of our partners, when they come to us, I ask them like, well, what do you want to see in an ad provider? What other ads are you running? A lot of them don't even really look at what we're doing as advertising. I think they think of it more as a part of the utility of their application. They want a lot of the formats that we found to be most successful tie into rewarded currency, reward for attention. So we just released a new video, new format that basically the end-to-end is controlled through a server controls. So we can place game-related content overlaid on top of video, which has really not been done before. Up until now, ad companies have used the native players, so they actually lose control of the experience when they send you out to the native video player. So we're looking at some really unique ways that we can leverage, blending the publisher content to sort of make, have it be a part of the utility of the experience. And I think rewards and incentives are a big part of that. So, but I think in the future, I do think it's, I think it's increasingly becoming, I see even I just came back from Helsinki last week, and I was talking to a game designer who had left Supercell, and one of the things they were talking about is, just recognizing, through looking at their analytics solutions, like they look at how to change the gameplay based on what's going on with retention and engagement. It's not just the monetization component. That's, for example, I know one of the things they're looking at was high-risk users who are basically they've stopped playing a game, then they come back after a while. Instead of immediately throwing them into a match with a player who is at their same level, they bring them back a couple of levels so that they have an easier time getting back into the game, and just subtle things with their own intuition. But I guess when I look at it, more from the artificial intelligence side and kind of data science side, I think there's just so many different variables and combinations. I think it's inevitable that the larger games are going to build out more of these kind of capabilities, and it's going to create some real separation for some of the larger publishers that have the hits. But I think we'll still continue to see, the cost of production is just so low, not necessarily to create a hit game, but there's just so many developers, hundreds of thousands of developers. I think we're still going to see the Flappy Birds that break through, at least in terms of time spent, and continue to, to drive a lot of adoption. But I don't know, what do you think of that dynamic as a company that's really figured out monetization in games? How do you feel about Flappy Birds or something like that comes in? And I think King even said in their earnings call that one of the reasons they might have had a soft summer was because of these type of games sort of taking a lot of the game sort of market share away.
Well, if Flappy Bird was responsible for the downfall of a big public company, that's a very sad day. Or just a really bad excuse. So either A, that's not great. I think gaming, especially any kind of digital entertainment market out there, there's always going to be a way for new entrants to come on board. Just if you can beat the incumbents based on creativity and being nimble. I mean, I'll say we definitely used to be a lot faster the smaller we were, and that's how we were able to kind of basically play with the giants at the time in the space. I mean, we started with just a handful of people and created Backyard Monsters and then a bunch of other games. And then we grew super fast and tried to bite off a little bit more than we can chew and scaled back some of our efforts to focus on fewer titles and kind of emphasize on quality. So, look, I mean, as any organization gets bigger and bigger, they become more and more inefficient. So I think there's always a way for a smaller, more nimble, creative company to come in and take a giant down. Or it's not really taking people down in gaming. It's typically not winner takes all. There's many different gaming companies can coexist and have a lot of success. So I think there's always a way to beat via creativity in this space and be more efficient than the other guys.
Great.
So we've got a red counter here. Overtime. Please wrap up.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Well, thanks, Will. It was a pleasure.
Thank
speaking
you.
to today.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it.